A millionaire watches with growing concern his 5-year-old son, who has been confined to a wheelchair for months, claiming terrible pain in his legs. His girlfriend, trained in physiotherapy, seems to be the only one able to ease the boy's suffering through special natural remedies. But when the gardener's daughter rushes desperately to him whispering, "Uncle, your girlfriend won't let him walk," he's startled, but thinks it's child's play, yet when she explains the reason, his heart races. The late afternoon sun gilded the sprawling lawns of the estate as Edward Thorne stood before his study window, gazing at a scene that should have filled him with pride, but now stirred a growing anguish. At 42, he had built a corporate empire that afforded him everything money could buy, except the one thing that truly mattered: seeing his son Leo running freely across the grass as he had just 6 months ago. The child's wheelchair stood out like an open wound amidst the blooming garden. Leo, only 5, remained still, his small fingers distantly playing with the spokes of the wheels, while Helena, his girlfriend, carefully adjusted the cushions around him. Her dedication was touching, almost maternal, and Edward felt grateful to have found someone willing to care for his son with such patience. Helena had a background in physical therapy that seemed like a gift from fate. When Leo began complaining of inexplicable leg pains, she immediately took over his care, applying specialized massages and preparing natural remedies that seemed to be the only ones capable of easing the boy's suffering. Without her, Edward didn't know how he would have managed his son's sudden deterioration. Dad is always working, Edward thought, acknowledging his own obsessive tendency towards business. As a single father since Leo was 2, he had always struggled to balance corporate responsibilities with parenthood. Helena's arrival in their lives 8 months ago had brought an emotional stability he hadn't experienced in years. She had become not only his partner, but also the maternal figure Leo had never had. However, something indefinable had bothered him in the past few days. Perhaps it was the speed with which Leo's condition had deteriorated, or the way the boy seemed completely dependent on Helena for any relief. The doctors consulted couldn't identify the exact cause of the progressive paralysis, merely prescribing rest and intensive physical therapy, precisely Helena's specialty. Edward watched Helena stand up and walk towards the kitchen, promising Leo she would prepare his favorite snack with the special remedies that made the pain subside. The boy smiled faintly, completely trusting the woman who had become his savior. The scene should have reassured Edward, but inexplicably it left him uneasy. It was then that he saw Anna, the 10-year-old daughter of his gardener Carmen, running desperately towards him. The girl, normally shy and reserved, crossed the garden with the look of panic that immediately alerted all of Edward's paternal instincts. She glanced quickly around, making sure Helena had truly entered the house before approaching the window where he stood. "Uncle Edward," Anna whispered, her voice trembling with fear and urgency, "I need to tell you something very serious about Leo. It's about Helena. She won't let him walk." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush, as if the girl had rehearsed this moment for a long time. "She puts a strong medicine in his food that makes his legs weak. I've seen it many times." Edward felt his blood run cold as Anna extended a small, empty vial towards him. "I found this in the kitchen trash," she explained, nervously glancing at the house door. "There are always these vials after she gives Leo his medicine. My mum doesn't know I picked them up, but I knew something was wrong." With trembling hands, Edward took the vial and read the label that would change his life forever. The words, "veterinary muscle relaxant for large animals," danced before his eyes like a death sentence. His world collapsed in that instant, as He realized he might have been blindly manipulated by someone willing to deliberately destroy his own son's mobility. Anna's innocence contrasted brutally with the gravity of her words, and Edward understood that his life had just split into a before and an after that desperate whisper in the golden afternoon garden. The night brought with it a restlessness Edward had never experienced. He stored the vial in his office safe, away from curious eyes, as his mind struggled to process Anna's devastating accusation. As a man who had built an empire based on quick, precise decisions, he found himself paralyzed for the first time in years, unable to distinguish between paranoia and protective instinct. Helena returned from the kitchen with Leo's snack, carrying a colorful tray with sandwiches cut into fun shapes and a glass of juice she had personally prepared. Her dedication in every detail was evident, from the way she arranged the food to the tenderness with which she helped the boy position himself better in his chair. Edward watched her every movement, searching for signs of guilt or nervousness, but found only the same tenderness as always. "Leo needs to take his natural medication before his snack," Helena explained, pulling a small dropper from her pocket. "It's just a few drops that help relax his muscles and lessen the pain." She smiled at Edward with that sweet expression that had won him over months ago. Dr. Henderson recommended keeping the routine religiously for the treatment to be effective. Edward forced a smile, but his heart quickened as he saw the dropper. It was identical to what Anna had described. He watched Helena carefully apply 3 drops into Leo's juice, stirring the drink with a small spoon before handing it to the boy. The gesture seemed natural, maternal, but now carried a sinister weight that made him nauseous. "How did you meet Dr. Henderson again?" Edward asked, trying to sound casual as he approached his son's chair. Leo smiled happily, savoring the carefully prepared juice. The boy's innocence contrasted brutally with the suspicions poisoning his father's mind. "I worked with him at a specialized clinic before we met," Helena replied promptly. "He's one of the best specialists in pediatric muscular disorders in the country. I was very lucky to stay in touch with him when Leo started showing symptoms." She caressed the boy's hair with genuine tenderness. "Without his treatment, our little one would be suffering much more." The explanation sounded perfectly logical, but Edward couldn't shake the image of the veterinary vial. He decided to subtly test his suspicions. "Maybe we should get a second medical opinion just to confirm the diagnosis," he suggested, watching Helena's reaction intently. For a fraction of a second, something flashed across her face, a glimmer of irritation or concern that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Of course, my love," she agreed, immediately recovering her affectionate tone. "But you know how anxious Leo gets with unfamiliar doctors. Dr. Henderson has already gained his trust, and interrupting the treatment now could jeopardize all the progress we've made." Edward nodded, pretending to accept the logic of the argument. But internally his distrust grew. Helena always had ready answers, always knew exactly what to say to quell his concerns. This ability, which he once considered an admirable quality, now deeply unsettled him. After the snack, Helena took Leo for physical therapy exercises in the adapted room Edward had specially built for his treatment. He followed them, watching, as she carefully manipulated the boy's legs, applying massages that seemed to provide immediate relief. Leo smiled throughout the process, clearly trusting her care. She genuinely cares for him, Edward thought, fighting against his own suspicions. How can I distrust someone who dedicates so much time and energy to Leo's well-being? But the image of the vial remained etched in his mind like a brand. That night, after Helena fell asleep beside him, Edward lay awake for hours, watching her serene face in the dim light. As a man accustomed to blindly trusting those close to him, he felt lost in a labyrinth of doubts. What if Anna was wrong? What if it was just a coincidence? But what if it wasn't? The full moon illuminated the room when Edward finally fell asleep, unaware that his decision to confront Helena the next day would unleash a sequence of events that would shake the very foundations of his family life. The next morning brought a fine rain that blurred the mansion windows, creating a perfect backdrop for the murky thoughts dominating Edward's mind. He had woken before dawn, unable to bear another hour lying beside Helena while suspicions corroded his inner peace. The veterinary vial remained hidden in the safe, but its presence haunted every move of the morning routine. Leo came down for breakfast in the motorized wheelchair Edward had bought to facilitate his mobility. The boy seemed paler than usual, his small hands trembling slightly as he tried to hold his glass of milk. Edward observed every detail, looking for signs that had previously gone unnoticed, questioning how many clues he had ignored in his blind trust. "Good morning, my love," Helena greeted, kissing Edward on the forehead with the same tenderness as always. She wore a light blue robe that accentuated her eyes, and her hair was tied in a relaxed bun that made her look even more maternal. Leo didn't sleep well last night. The leg pains bothered him during the early hours. Edward felt a pang in his chest. Were the pains real or a consequence of the supposed poisoning? How to distinguish between legitimate symptoms and the effects of a toxic substance? Perhaps we should increase the dosage of the natural medicine, Helena suggested, pulling the familiar dropper from the kitchen cabinet. Dr. Henderson always says it's best to prevent symptoms from worsening. "Wait," Edward said, his voice coming out tenser than he intended. Helena paused mid-motion, looking at him with surprise. "I'd like to see this natural medicine more closely. As a father, I feel I should better understand what Leo is taking." Helena hesitated for an instant before handing the small bottle to Edward. "Of course, dear. It's a specific herbal extract for pediatric muscle relaxation, completely natural and safe." Her fingers brushed his during the transfer, a touch that once calmed him, but now made him shudder. Edward examined the bottle carefully. The label read, "Natural extract, pediatric." But something about the paper's texture seemed too new, as if it had been pasted over a previous label. His businessman's hands, accustomed to detecting falsifications in documents, noticed irregularities that put him on alert. "Where exactly do you buy this?" "From a specialized compounding pharmacy," Helena replied quickly. "Dr. Henderson has exclusive contacts with suppliers of imported natural compounds. That's why the treatment is so effective." She smiled, but Edward noticed a stiffness in her expression he had never perceived before. Deciding to be more direct, Edward pulled the veterinary vial from his pocket, observing Helena's reaction closely. "Anna found this in our trash yesterday," he said, his voice laden with an emotion he struggled to control. "Veterinary muscle relaxant. Can you explain what animal medication was doing in our kitchen?" Helena's face paled slightly before she regained her composure with impressive speed. "My God, Edward, how can you believe a child's fantasies?" Her voice sounded hurt, almost indignant. "That vial must be from some old treatment the gardener used on the property's animals. Anna must have found it in the shed and made up this absurd story." But she said she saw you putting drops in Leo's food," Edward insisted, watching every micro-expression on the face of the woman he loved. Helena sighed deeply, approaching Edward with tears in her eyes. "Darling, Anna is a child craving attention. She sees how Leo receives special care and might be making up stories to get attention too." She touched his face softly. "Think about it. Why would I harm Leo? I love him as if he were my own son." Helena's words sounded convincing, and Edward felt his resolve waver. His natural tendency to trust those close to him struggled against the disturbing evidence. Perhaps Anna really was making things up. Perhaps his own paranoia was destroying a precious relationship based on unfounded suspicions. But when he looked at Leo, he saw the boy watching the conversation with frightened eyes, as if he understood more than he let on. The boy seemed to want to say something, but remained silent, creating a weight in the air that Edward couldn't ignore. "I need time to think," Edward murmured, putting both vials back in his pocket. Helena nodded comprehendingly, but he caught a flicker of something in her eyes, relief or calculation, that planted a new seed of doubt in his already troubled heart. The following days transformed Edward into a silent observer of his own life. Every gesture from Helena, every interaction with Leo, every word spoken was analyzed through the filter of suspicion that grew like a shadow in his heart. He felt torn between the love he nurtured for her and the paternal protective instinct that screamed alarms in his mind. Anna had avoided the main house since the confrontation, staying close to the gardening shed where her mother Carmen worked. Whenever Helena approached, the girl would run to hide, a behavior Edward began to notice with growing concern. During his discreet observations, he realized that Anna showed genuine fear, not the malice of a child fabricating stories. On Tuesday, while pretending to work in his study, Edward saw Helena preparing Leo's lunch in the garden through the window. She had set up a small table under the pergola, creating a picturesque setting for an outdoor meal. The boy smiled as she arranged the plates, but Edward noticed how Leo nervously looked at the glass of juice Helena carefully prepared. "Daddy, can I have water instead of juice today?" Leo asked in a small voice. The simple request echoed in Edward's heart like a cry for help. Why would a 5-year-old refuse fruit juice? Why would he seem so apprehensive watching Helena prepare his drink? "Of course not, darling," Helena replied sweetly, but Edward detected an underlying firmness in her voice. "The juice has special vitamins that help your legs get stronger. Remember what Dr. Henderson always says about the importance of nutrition in treatment?" She carefully stirred the liquid with a small spoon, a ritual Edward had witnessed hundreds of times without questioning. Leo lowered his eyes and reluctantly accepted the glass. Edward watched his son drink slowly, as if each sip were a sacrifice. There was something deeply unsettling about the child's resignation, a submission that shouldn't exist in someone so young. How had he not noticed before that Leo seemed to be forced to consume something against his will? After lunch, Helena took Leo for his daily physical therapy session. Edward followed them discreetly, positioning himself where he could observe through the half-open door of the exercise room. Helena manipulated Leo's legs with seemingly professional movements, but the boy grimaced in pain during the procedures. "It hurts, Helena," Leo murmured, tears streaming down his rosy cheeks. "I know, my love, but it's necessary for you to walk again," Helena replied, her voice filled with a patience that was beginning to sound forced to Edward's ears. "The pain means the treatment is working. Soon you'll be running around the garden again." Edward felt his stomach churn as he realized a disturbing contradiction. If the pain indicated improvement, why was Leo growing progressively weaker? Why did physical therapy, which should strengthen him, seem to debilitate him more with each session? The questions piled up in his mind like pieces of a sinister puzzle. That afternoon, while Helena was out buying medicine, Edward took the opportunity to talk to Leo alone. He approached the wheelchair where the boy rested in the garden, surrounded by the toys he had abandoned when the pains began. "Leo, Daddy needs to ask you an important question," Edward said, kneeling beside his son. "Do your legs really hurt, or is there something else bothering you?" The boy looked around nervously before whispering, "Daddy, my legs feel weird after I drink Helena's juice. They get heavy and I can't move them properly." His innocent words hit Edward like a punch to the gut. But she said it's normal and that I can't tell anyone because people won't understand the special treatment. Leo's revelation confirmed Edward's worst fears. Helena had instructed a 5-year-old to lie about his own symptoms, manipulating his childish trust to conceal the effects of the substance being administered. The discovery filled Edward with a cold, calculated fury he struggled to control. "Leo, did you tell anyone else about this?" Edward asked, trying to keep his voice calm so as not to scare his son. "Only Anna," Leo replied. "She said she knew something was wrong and that she was going to tell you. But Helena found out we talked and said Anna was trying to hurt our family." Edward understood then that Anna had been braver than he imagined, and that Helena was systematically isolating Leo from any external source of support or testimony. The discovery of Leo's manipulation transformed Edward into a determined investigator. That same night, after Helena fell asleep, he discreetly searched her personal belongings, looking for evidence to confirm or refute his growing suspicions. In her closet, among carefully organized clothes, he found a small leather bag he didn't recognize. Inside the bag, Edward discovered 3 vials identical to the one Anna had found in the trash, all containing the same veterinary substance. Along with the vials, there were handwritten notes with dosages and timings, as if Helena kept a meticulous record of administering the substance to Leo. The dates on the notes coincided exactly with the onset of the boy's symptoms, 6 months ago. One of the notes particularly caught his attention. Initial dose too low. Leo still tried to walk. Increase gradually to avoid suspicion. The clinical coldness of the words contrasted brutally with the affectionate image Helena projected. Edward felt nauseous as he realized that his son's paralysis had been carefully planned and executed for months. He discreetly photographed all the evidence with his phone before putting everything back exactly as he had found it. His hands trembled with anger and disbelief as he processed the magnitude of the betrayal. The woman sleeping beside him, who kissed Leo with affection every night, was systematically destroying an innocent child's health. The next morning, Edward feigned normality as he watched Helena prepare Leo's breakfast. Her every movement now seemed calculated and sinister. When she added the usual drops to the boy's juice, Edward had to control himself not to snatch it from his son's hands immediately. "Helena, I need to travel for work today," Edward lied, testing a theory that had begun to form in his mind. "I'll be away until tomorrow. Can you take care of Leo alone?" "Of course, my love," Helena replied promptly, but Edward caught a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "Leo and I will have a special day together. Perhaps we can intensify his physical exercises since he'll be more rested without your noisy meetings." In the study, the suggestion to intensify any treatment alarmed Edward deeply. He kissed Helena and Leo, pretending to leave for the airport, but instead parked his car a few blocks from the mansion and returned on foot, hiding in the abandoned barn that offered a direct view of the main house. Through binoculars he kept for birdwatching, Edward witnessed scenes that would forever confirm his worst suspicions. Helena prepared Leo's lunch with special care, adding not only the usual drops, but a visibly larger amount of the toxic substance. The boy initially refused the juice, but Helena insisted with a firmness that bordered on coercion. "Leo needs to drink all his juice to get strong," Edward read on her lips through the binoculars. When the boy continued resisting, Helena adopted a more authoritative tone, reminding him of the consequences of not following the medical treatment. The psychological manipulation of a 5-year-old was devastating to witness. After Leo reluctantly consumed the adulterated drink, Edward observed the effects manifest in real time. In less than 30 minutes, the boy began to show extreme weakness. his small hands trembling as he tried to play with his toy cars. Helena carefully noted the symptoms in a notebook, like a scientist documenting experiments. The most shocking scene occurred when Leo tried to get up from his chair to reach a fallen toy. His legs immediately gave way, and he fell to the floor, crying from frustration and fear. Helena ran to help him, but Edward noticed that she first checked if anyone was watching before showing concern. "Why don't my legs work, Helena?" Leo cried, his small voice filled with confusion and terror. "Because you're very sick, dear," Helena replied, embracing him with a tenderness that now seemed utterly false in Edward's eyes. "But don't worry, Helena will take care of you forever, even if you can never walk again." The final words hit Edward like a sinister revelation. Helena didn't intend to cure Leo. She wanted to keep him permanently dependent, creating a situation where she would be indispensable in their lives. The discovery of this long-term intention filled Edward with a fierce determination to protect his son at all costs. When Helena put Leo down for a rest after the traumatic episode, Edward saw Anna furtively approach the house window. Obviously, concerned by the boy's cries, the girl's courage in continuing to monitor the situation, even after being discouraged, proved she was the only reliable ally Leo had at that moment. Edward returned to the mansion that night, pretending he had just arrived from his business trip, carrying gifts for Leo and flowers for Helena. The charade of normalcy became psychological torture, but he knew he had to act cautiously to protect his son from any escalation in the dosage of the toxic substances. "How was your day?" Edward asked, embracing Helena with a forced affection that cost him every ounce of self-control. She smiled with that familiar sweetness, reporting how it had been a productive day of physical therapy and how Leo was responding well to the intensified treatment. "Leo fell asleep earlier today," Helena explained, seductively arranging her hair. "The exercise sessions tired him more than usual, but that's a very positive sign. It means his muscles are working, even if he doesn't realize it." The lies flowed from her lips with a naturalness that haunted Edward. When Edward went upstairs to check on Leo, he found the boy deeply asleep, but his face was pale and his small hands trembled even in his sleep. He gently touched his son's forehead and felt a slightly low temperature, another sign of the veterinary substance's effects on his delicate system. The next day, Edward decided to investigate Helena's professional background more deeply. Using his business contacts, he ordered a discreet background check that revealed disturbing information. Helena had only a basic physical therapy aid certificate, not the specialized training she claimed to have. More alarmingly, she had worked at 3 veterinary clinics in the last 5 years, always with access to controlled medications. The private investigator found a disturbing pattern in Helena's previous relationships. She had dated 2 other wealthy men with young children, and in both cases, the children developed mysterious health problems that required intensive care, which only she knew how to provide. One of the relationships ended when the child was hospitalized for accidental poisoning, and Helena disappeared before further investigations could be conducted. The discoveries filled Edward with horror as he realized that Leo was not Helena's first victim. She seemed to follow a calculated pattern: identify vulnerable single men with young children, gain their trust through seemingly dedicated care, and then create situations of absolute dependence through medical manipulation. During lunch, Edward observed Helena with new eyes. Every affectionate gesture towards Leo now seemed an elaborate performance. When she prepared the juice with the usual drops, Edward noticed how her fingers moved with surgical precision, measuring each dose like someone with extensive experience handling chemical substances. "Helena, you've mentioned Dr. Henderson several times," Edward said casually. "I'd like to schedule an appointment to speak with him personally about Leo's treatment." For the first time since they met, Edward saw Helena genuinely surprised and uncomfortable. "Dr. Henderson is very busy and rarely sees parents for consultations," she replied quickly. "He prefers to work through trained intermediaries like me. That's why our partnership works so well." "But surely he would make an exception to discuss the case of a client's son who can pay any amount for the best care," Edward insisted, deliberately pressing. Helena became visibly tense, her hands clenching slightly before relaxing. "I'll try to schedule something," she agreed, but Edward realized it was a stalling tactic. "Perhaps in a few weeks, when the current treatment shows more results." That afternoon, while Helena was busy with Leo in the garden, Edward called every orthopedic and physical therapy office in the region, looking for a Dr. Henderson specializing in pediatric muscular disorders. After 2 hours of calls, the devastating truth emerged. No doctor with that name and specialty existed within a 200-mile radius of the city. Dr. Henderson was Helena's invention, a fictional character created to lend medical credibility to Leo's systematic poisoning. The discovery confirmed that Edward was dealing with an experienced manipulator who had meticulously planned every aspect of her criminal scheme. When Helena returned from the session in the garden, carrying Leo asleep in her arms, Edward forced a smile as his heart filled with an iron resolve. She had underestimated his investigative abilities and his determination to protect his son. Now he possessed enough evidence to expose the whole truth. "How was physical therapy today?" Edward asked, kissing Leo's forehead as Helena placed him in his chair. "Very productive," Helena replied. "Leo is making remarkable progress, even if it's not visible yet. Dr. Henderson always says that true healing happens internally before it manifests externally." Edward nodded, knowing every word was a carefully constructed lie. But now, finally, he was prepared to turn the tables on the woman who was systematically destroying his innocent son's life. Edward woke on a rainy Friday with a determination he hadn't felt in months. He had spent the night devising a careful plan to expose Helena without putting Leo at additional risk. However, what he would discover in the next few hours would completely change the course of his strategy and reveal a conspiracy far deeper than he had imagined. While Helena was preparing breakfast, Edward received an unexpected call. It was Carmen, the gardener, whispering nervously on the phone. "Mr. Thorne, I need to speak with you urgently. Anna discovered something terrible last night. Helena isn't working alone." Edward's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, not alone?" "Anna saw Helena talking on the phone in the garden after everyone was asleep," Carmen explained, her voice trembling with fear. "She was talking about accelerating the timeline and that the father is getting suspicious. Someone is directing her, Mr. Thorne. Someone who knows everything." Edward felt the ground drop out from under him. Helena wasn't just a solitary manipulator. She was part of a larger scheme, possibly an organized network that targeted wealthy men through their vulnerable children. "Carmen, you and Anna need to leave the property today. It's not safe for you to stay here." "We're already leaving, sir," Carmen replied. "But Anna insisted on leaving something for you. It's hidden in the blue plant pot near the back entrance." After hanging up, Edward waited for Helena to busy herself with Leo to investigate Anna's hiding place. In the indicated pot, he found a small recording device that the brave girl had managed to position near the kitchen window the night before. His hands trembled as he discovered that a 10-year-old child had risked her safety to protect Leo. Back in his study, Edward played the recording and listened to a conversation that would change his understanding of the entire situation. "Helena's Voice sounded cold and calculating, completely different from the sweetness she displayed during the day. "The man is getting suspicious. I think someone warned him about the medication," Helena said on the phone. An unknown male voice replied, from the other end, instructing her to accelerate the process. "You sure his life insurance covers domestic accidents?" the male voice asked. "Because if the kid dies from an accidental overdose of the relaxants, Edward will be too devastated to investigate properly. It'll be our moment to seize control of the fortune through the will you convinced him to sign." Edward felt nauseous as he realized that Helena didn't just intend to permanently incapacitate Leo. She was planning to kill him and then eliminate Edward too, taking full control of his fortune through legal documents he had blindly signed. The recording continued with horrifying details. "The lawyer you recommended really convinced me to name Helena as Leo's guardian in case of my death," the partner's voice confirmed. "And she already has power of attorney for my businesses. When both of you die, she will legally inherit everything." Edward remembered how Helena had suggested better organizing his documents a few weeks ago, recommending an attorney specializing in estate planning for single parents. He had signed several papers without reading them carefully, trusting the woman he loved and who seemed genuinely concerned about Leo's future. The realization that he had been manipulated into signing his own and his son's death warrants filled him with a controlled fury unlike anything he had ever experienced. Helena wasn't just a poisoner. She was part of a criminal organization specializing in murdering entire families to seize fortunes. When Helena returned from the garden carrying Leo, Edward feigned normality as he watched her every move with new perspective. She was not only dangerous to Leo, she was a mortal threat to both of them, and time was running out rapidly. "Leo seems weaker today," Helena commented casually, as if discussing the weather. "Perhaps it's time to significantly increase the dosage of the medication. Dr. Henderson always says that the most severe cases require more aggressive treatments." Edward understood that the significantly increased dosage was likely the final dose that would kill Leo. Helena was implementing the terminal phase of her plan, convinced that he remained completely manipulated and unaware of the danger. "Of course," Edward agreed, his voice sounding natural despite his internal desperation. "Do whatever is necessary to help our son." As Helena smiled with satisfaction, believing she had convinced Edward to authorize the murder of his own son, he was already mentally devising a desperate plan to save Leo and expose the entire criminal network that had infiltrated his family. Life through the woman who had pretended to love him. The discovery of the murderous conspiracy transformed Edward into a completely different man. Every second now represented a matter of life or death for Leo, and he knew he needed to act with surgical precision so as not to alert Helena to his discovery. The slightest slip could result in the acceleration of her plan, putting his son in immediate danger. During lunch, Edward watched Helena prepare Leo's juice with heightened attention. Her hands moved with the same delicacy as always, but now he knew that every added drop was a step closer to the lethal dose she planned to administer. When she handed the glass to Leo, Edward had to use all his willpower not to intercept it. "Daddy, can I play in the garden after lunch?" Leo asked in a voice weaker than usual. The substance was clearly affecting not only his legs, but also his general energy and motor coordination. Edward noticed how the boy held his fork with difficulty, his small fingers trembling with the effort. "Of course, my love," Edward replied, forcing a smile as his heart shattered. "Helena, could you prepare some special snacks for us to take to the garden? I want Leo to have extra energy to play." Helena nodded enthusiastically, interpreting the request as a sign that Edward was completely oblivious to the real situation. "I'll prepare that special energy juice he loves so much," she said. her eyes gleaming with a malice Edward could now clearly detect. While Helena was busy in the kitchen, Edward took the opportunity to send urgent messages to his private attorney and a trusted doctor who didn't know Helena. He needed to invalidate the documents he had signed and get specialized medical help to reverse the effects of Leo's poisoning. But all of this had to be done without raising suspicion. "I need you to come to my house immediately," Edward wrote. To Dr. Clark, a renowned pediatrician who had attended his family for years. "Leo is being systematically poisoned. Don't tell anyone about this and don't come through the main door. Use the back entrance at 3:30 p.m. when Helena is busy with physical therapy." Dr. Clark's reply arrived quickly. "Edward, this is very serious. I'm on my way with a discreet team. Prepare samples of any substance you suspect is being used." Edward felt partial relief knowing professional help was coming, but he still needed to maintain the charade for a few crucial hours. When Helena finished preparing the snacks, he noticed that she had added a visibly larger amount of the toxic substance to Leo's juice. "This juice has a different color today," Edward commented casually, testing to see if Helena would admit to altering the formula. Dr. Henderson suggested a stronger concentration of the natural extracts, Helena explained promptly. "He believes Leo is ready for the next level of treatment. He might feel more sleepy today, but that means his body is responding positively." The mention of sleepiness alarmed Edward deeply. Excessive sleepiness could indicate that Helena was preparing Leo for an overdose that would simulate a natural death during sleep. He needed to prevent his son from consuming that juice at all costs. "You know what, Helena?" Edward said, standing up suddenly. "I just remembered that Leo has an allergy to some artificial colorings. Better if I prepare a fresh juice for him, just to be safe." For an instant, Helena's face showed genuine irritation before she recomposed herself. "Edward, you're being overly paranoid. This juice is completely natural, and Dr. Henderson specifically approved this formula." "I know, my love," Edward replied, maintaining an affectionate tone as he took the glass from Leo's hands. "But as a father, I prefer to err on the side of caution. You understand, don't you?" Helena reluctantly agreed, but Edward realized she was starting to suspect his change in behavior. He needed to be even more cautious, not to precipitate a desperate reaction from her before medical help arrived. During the afternoon, while pretending to play in the garden, Edward observed Helena make several phone calls, always stepping away to avoid being overheard. From her gestures, she seemed to be receiving instructions or reporting the unexpected resistance he had encountered regarding the special juice. At 3:25 p.m., Edward saw Dr. Clark discreetly approach through the back entrance, accompanied by a specialized nurse. His heart pounded, knowing he would finally have professional help to save Leo, but he also knew that the next few minutes would be the most dangerous, as Helena could react violently upon discovering that her conspiracy had been exposed. "Leo, how about we show Helena those new toys in the shed?" Edward suggested, trying to draw Helena away from the main house so Dr. Clark could enter unseen. But Helena looked at him with a strange expression, as if she finally understood that something fundamental had changed in the dynamic between them, creating a tension in the air that foreshadowed the inevitable confrontation approaching. The suspicion in Helena's eyes grew like a storm forming on the horizon. Edward realized she was evaluating his every word, every gesture, looking for signs that her charade had been discovered. The air between them grew thick with unspoken tension, like two poker players trying to read each other's cards. "Edward, you're acting strangely today," Helena commented, her voice maintaining its usual sweetness, but with an underlying note of alert. "Since yesterday, you seem different. Is there something you'd like to tell me?" "Just worried about Leo," Edward replied, forcing naturalness as he pushed his son's wheelchair through the garden. A father always worries when he sees his child suffering. You know how it is. He watched Dr. Clark move cautiously through the back of the property, waiting for the right moment to enter the house. Leo, seemingly oblivious to the tension between the adults, played with a toy car Edward had placed in his small hands. But the boy seemed more lethargic than usual, his movements slow and imprecise, signs that the toxic substance was accumulating dangerously in his system. Perhaps we should schedule that appointment with Dr. Henderson for tomorrow, Edward suggested, testing again to see Helena's reaction to the non-existent doctor. I'm eager to meet him personally and discuss Leo's prognosis. This time, Helena couldn't completely disguise her irritation. Edward, I already explained that Dr. Henderson is very busy. He works through qualified intermediaries for a specific reason. Insisting on meeting him personally shows a lack of trust in the professional treatment Leo is receiving. It's not a lack of trust, Edward insisted. It's just a father's natural desire to better understand what's happening with his son. He paused deliberately, especially when the treatment seems to be intensifying the symptoms instead of improving them. The words hit Helena like a slap. For the first time since they met, her mask of maternal dedication slipped completely, revealing a glimpse of the calculating coldness she had hidden. How can you say that? She retorted, her voice rising slightly. I dedicate my entire life to Leo's care, and I'm grateful for that, Edward said carefully, but I can't ignore that he's getting progressively weaker. Perhaps it's time to seek a second medical opinion, regardless of what Dr. Henderson thinks about it. Helena stopped abruptly, her fists clenching at her sides. Edward saw that he had crossed an invisible line, forcing her to choose between maintaining the charade or escalating the situation. Edward Thorne, she said, her voice now laden with an authority he had never heard before. You are questioning my professional judgment based on unfounded paranoia. Perhaps, Edward agreed, but I'm his father, and my unfounded paranoia is telling me something isn't right. He knelt beside Leo, gently touching the boy's pale face. Leo, can you tell me how you feel after taking Helena's medicine? Helena quickly intervened. Edward, you can't confuse the child with questions she doesn't have the maturity to answer properly. But Leo, with the brutal honesty of small children, replied, Daddy, after the juice I get very sleepy and my legs feel heavy like rocks. Sometimes I forget things too. Memory loss, Edward thought, recognizing another symptom of muscle relaxant, poisoning. Helena was not only physically paralyzing Leo, but also affecting his cognitive abilities. Leo is obviously confused, Helena said quickly. The illness can cause temporary disorientation. That's why Dr. Henderson insists on the importance of strictly maintaining the medication routine. Edward saw Dr. Clark make a discreet signal from the kitchen window, indicating he had managed to enter the house and was analyzing the substances he had found. It was time to force Helena to reveal more about her plans. Helena, Edward said, standing up and looking directly into her eyes. I need to ask you a direct question, and I'd like an honest answer. Of course, she replied, but her body posture became defensive. Do you truly believe Leo will fully recover with this treatment? The question caught Helena off guard. For several seconds, she visibly struggled to formulate a response that would keep her charade intact. What exactly are you insinuating? I'm asking if you honestly expect my son to walk again someday, Edward pressed, or if you're preparing us both to accept that he will remain in a wheelchair permanently. Helena looked around nervously before replying, as if seeking an escape route. Some conditions are more challenging than others. The important thing is that Leo receives proper care, regardless of his future limitations. Care that only you can provide, Edward observed, finally verbalizing his understanding of her plan. Exactly, Helena confirmed, unaware that she had just admitted her intention to keep Leo permanently dependent to ensure her own indispensability in their lives. The sound of approaching footsteps from the back entrance made Helena turn her head sharply. Dr. Clark emerged from the house, carrying a small medical bag and displaying a grave expression that Edward immediately recognized. The pediatrician had found enough evidence to confirm the worst fears about Leo's systematic poisoning. "Who is that man?" Helena asked, her voice betraying the first real sign of panic since Edward had met her. Her posture instantly shifted from defensive to clearly alarmed, like a cornered animal assessing its escape options. "Dr. Clark has been Leo's pediatrician for years," Edward explained calmly, watching Helena's every micro-expression. "I thought it would be interesting for him to speak with Dr. Henderson about the case. You know, a professional collaboration between specialists." Helena's face visibly paled. "Edward, you can't just bring unknown doctors to interfere with Leo's specialized treatment without consulting Dr. Henderson first. This could jeopardize all the progress we've made." Dr. Clark approached the group, his experienced eyes quickly assessing Leo's condition in the wheelchair. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice carrying controlled professional urgency, "I need to speak with you immediately, in private." "There are no secrets between Helena and me," Edward said, a calculated lie to force the situation. "Dr. Clark, feel free to speak openly about anything related to Leo's health." The pediatrician hesitated for a moment before looking directly at Helena. "Madam, in my 30 years of medicine, I have never seen a case so clearly indicative of poisoning by veterinary muscle relaxants in a child. The samples I analyzed in the kitchen contained concentrations that could be lethal for a child of Leo's weight." The silence that followed was deafening. Helena stood completely still, as if time had stopped for her. Edward watched various emotions cross her face: surprise, anger, fear, and finally a calculating coldness he had never seen before. "I don't know what you're talking about," Helena said, her voice now completely different, devoid of warmth, devoid of tenderness, just a metallic hardness. "If you found veterinary substances in the house, it must be because the gardener left them somewhere inappropriate." "The gardener was fired a week ago," Edward reminded her gently. "And these substances were in your personal bag, Helena, along with detailed notes on dosages and administration times that exactly match Leo's symptoms." Helena looked from Edward to Dr. Clark, rapidly assessing her options. "You don't understand," she said, changing strategy. "Everything I did was for love of this family. Leo was becoming too hyperactive, taking unnecessary risks in the garden. I just wanted to protect him from hurting himself." "Protect him by chemically paralyzing him?" Dr. Clark asked, his voice filled with professional indignation. "Madam, what you did constitutes medical torture of a defenseless child." "I would never hurt Leo," Helena screamed, completely losing her composure. "I love him more than anyone in this world. Everything I did was to keep him safe and to ensure our family stayed together." "Our family?" Edward repeated, finally verbalizing the question that had tormented him for weeks. "Helena, Leo isn't your son. I'm not your husband. What family? Do you think you're protecting?" The words hit Helena like a bucket of cold water. For a moment, she seemed completely lost, as if she had been torn from an elaborate delusion. "We are a family," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "I took care of him when he was sick. I dedicated my life to him. That makes us a family." Dr. Clark took advantage of Helena's confusion to approach Leo and begin a quick assessment. Weak pulse, Diminished reflexes, clear signs of central nervous system depressant intoxication, he murmured to Edward. We need to get him to the hospital immediately to start the detoxification process. No! Helena screamed, moving suddenly towards Leo's chair. You can't take him from me! I'm the only person who knows how to care for him properly. Without me, he'll suffer. Edward blocked Helena's path, positioning himself protectively between her and Leo. Helena, it's over. I know about your history with other families. I know about the other men, the other children you poisoned. I know about your partner on the phone and the murder plots. The mention of her partner and the murder plots made Helena recoil as if she'd been punched. Her eyes widened with genuine surprise and fear. How did you... she began, before cutting herself off, realizing she had inadvertently confirmed the existence of the larger conspiracy. Anna recorded your phone conversation, Edward explained. A brave 10-year-old child exposed your entire criminal scheme because she cared more about Leo's safety than her own protection. Helena looked around desperately, like a wounded animal seeking an escape, finally understanding that her elaborate charade had completely crumbled, and there was no longer any way to pretend to be the dedicated caregiver Edward had loved. Helena remained motionless for long seconds, as if processing the magnitude of her exposure. When she finally looked up, Edward saw a complete transformation in her eyes. The affectionate woman he had known had vanished, replaced by someone cold and calculating he had never truly met. You have no idea what you've just done, Helena said, her voice now laden with a barely disguised threat. Leo needs me. Without the proper treatment, he could have seizures. He could fall into a coma. You're putting his life at risk because of male paranoia. Dr. Clark, who continued to discreetly examine Leo, looked up with professional indignation. Madam, what this child needs is supervised medical detoxification, not more doses of the substance that is destroying his nervous system. Nervous system? Edward repeated, feeling his blood run cold. Dr. Clark, could there be permanent damage? The pediatrician hesitated before responding, looking meaningfully at Leo, who seemed to be following the conversation more attentively than he. Let on. We need detailed examinations to assess the extent of the damage, but there are worrying signs of muscle atrophy and possible cognitive impairment. The words hit Edward like a death sentence. Helena had not only tortured his son, she had possibly caused irreversible damage to a 5-year-old child. The anger he felt was unlike any emotion he had ever experienced, a cold, controlled fury that frightened him by its sheer intensity. Why? Edward asked, his voice coming out as a whisper laden with pain. Leo is an innocent child. How could you do this to him? Helena let out a bitter laugh that contrasted brutally with all the displays of affection Edward had witnessed for months. You men are all the same, she said, her mask finally falling completely. You think you can use women as convenient nannies and then discard us when you don't need us anymore. I never used you, Edward protested, genuinely confused by the accusation. I loved you. I thought you loved Leo too. Love. Helena laughed again, the sound echoing through the garden like broken glass. Edward, you've known me for less than a year. What you call love is just convenience. You needed someone to care for Leo so you could remain obsessed with work. Helena's accusations contained painful kernels of truth that Edward couldn't completely deny. He really had felt relieved to find someone willing to take on the parenting responsibilities he struggled to balance with his professional life. But that doesn't justify poisoning a child, said Dr. Clark, intervening in the conversation with medical authority. Madam, regardless of your feelings toward the father, Leo is an innocent victim of your actions. Victim? Helena turned to the pediatrician with flaming eyes. I dedicated 8 months of my life to caring for this child. I was here when he woke up crying in the middle of the night, when Edward was traveling on business. I was here when he needed medical attention, when Edward was too busy to notice his own son was suffering. Edward felt every word like a stab, recognizing the painful truth behind Helena's manipulative accusations. He truly had been an absent father, trusting too much in her care and not paying enough attention to the signs that something was wrong. "You're right," Edward admitted, his voice laden with guilt and remorse. "I failed as a father, but that didn't give you the right to hurt Leo, to punish me." "I wasn't hurting him," Helena screamed, completely losing control. "I was creating a situation where he would always need me, where our family would stay together. Without the illness, you wouldn't need my care anymore." Helena's explicit confession of her motivations filled Edward with horror. She had deliberately incapacitated a child to secure her own relevance in their lives, turning his paternal love into a prison of fabricated medical dependence. Leo, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, suddenly spoke in a small, frightened voice. "Helena, why did you make my juice taste bad? Why don't my legs work after I drink it?" The child's innocent question created a devastating silence in the garden. Helena looked at Leo with an expression of shock, as if she had momentarily forgotten that the object of her obsession was present, hearing every word of her confession. "Leo, you don't understand," she began, trying to regain some semblance of her maternal persona. "Everything I did was to hurt him," Edward interrupted, finally verbalizing the truth he had struggled to accept. "Helena, you systematically tortured my son to manipulate me. There's no justification, no explanation that makes this acceptable." Helena looked from Edward to Dr. Clark, then to Leo, finally understanding that there was no longer any way to maintain any illusion about her actions or motivations, creating a moment of absolute tension that foreshadowed a desperate reaction. The realization that there was no escape made something break inside Helena. Edward saw the exact moment she transitioned from denial to absolute despair, her eyes taking on a wild expression that made him instinctively position himself closer to Leo's chair. "If you think you can just discard me after everything I've done for this family," Helena said, her voice trembling with an emotion Edward couldn't quite identify, "you're sorely mistaken." Dr. Clark noticed the dangerous shift in her tone and discreetly pulled his phone from his pocket, preparing to call emergency services. "Madam, I suggest we remain calm and think about Leo's well-being above all else." "Leo's well-being?" Helena laughed hysterically. "I'm the only person who truly cares about his well-being. You want to destroy years of careful treatment based on paranoia and distrust." Edward saw Helena move her hand toward her pocket, where he knew she kept the dropper with the toxic substance. "Helena, what are you doing?" "What I should have done weeks ago," she replied, pulling out not only the dropper, but also a small vial full of clear liquid. "If you can't see that Leo needs the full treatment, then I'll have to administer it directly." The implicit threat in her statement made Edward panic. "You're not touching my son," he said, moving to block Helena's access to the wheelchair. "My son too," Helena screamed, her voice echoing through the garden with an intensity that startled birds from nearby trees. "I cared for him. I protected him. I dedicated my life to him when you were too busy to be a proper father." Dr. Clark seized the distraction to discreetly dial emergency services, whispering information about the situation. Edward caught fragments of the conversation: child in danger, toxic substances, unstable adult. Leo, frightened by the screams, began to cry. The sound of the boy's tears seemed to awaken something even more desperate in Helena. "Don't Cry, my love, she said, trying to approach the chair despite Edward blocking her path. Everything will be fine once you take the special medicine. No, Leo screamed with a strength that surprised everyone present. I don't want any more medicine. It makes my legs bad. The child's clear rejection hit Helena like a physical slap. You don't understand, she murmured, tears beginning to stream down her face. Without the medicine, you'll get well and won't need me anymore. Your daddy will find someone else to care for you and I'll be alone again. The pathetic confession revealed the depth of the psychological need that motivated Helena's actions. Edward understood that she was not just a calculating criminal, but a deeply disturbed person who had confused control with care, dependence with love. Helena, Edward said, attempting a more compassionate approach, you don't have to hurt Leo to have a place in our lives. We can talk about this, find a solution that doesn't involve poisoning a child. Lies, she screamed. All men say that until they find someone better. Richard said the same thing before he kicked me out when he found out about the special care I gave his son. Mark promised we'd be a family until he decided I was too unstable to care for children. The mentions of Richard and Mark confirmed to Edward that Helena had indeed repeated this pattern with other families. How many children had suffered before Leo? How many fathers had been manipulated in the same way? The sound of distant sirens sent Helena into full panic. You called the police? She asked, looking around desperately. You don't understand. They'll separate me from Leo forever. Helena, hand over the vial, Edward said, extending his hand with all the calm he could muster. Let's resolve this together, but you need to stop threatening my son. Helena looked at the vial in her hands, then at Leo crying in his chair, then at Edward. I just wanted a family, she murmured, her voice breaking completely. I just wanted to be needed by someone. You can be needed without hurting innocent people, said Dr. Clark gently, seizing her moment of vulnerability. There are healthy ways to build relationships, Helena. For a moment it seemed Helena might hand over the vial and accept help. But then she heard the sirens getting closer and something hardened in her expression. If I can't have Leo, she said, her voice taking on a terrifying coldness, then no one can. Edward realized Helena was preparing to administer a potentially lethal dose of the substance to Leo, turning the tranquil garden into the scene of a desperate confrontation for an innocent child's life. The moment seemed to stretch eternally. As Helena held the vial with the lethal substance, her eyes fixed on Leo with a desperate determination that chilled Edward's blood. The sirens were getting closer, but he knew they might arrive too late to prevent an irreversible tragedy. Helena, listen to my voice, Edward said, forcing himself to sound calm despite the terror he felt. Look at Leo. Really look at him. Do you see fear in his eyes? Is that the boy you claim to love? Helena lowered her gaze to Leo, who watched her with tears streaming down his frightened little face. For an instant, Edward saw an internal struggle unfold in her expression, the disturbed woman who had convinced herself she was protecting Leo versus the reality that she was terrorizing an innocent child. I didn't mean to scare him, Helena murmured, her voice breaking. I just wanted him to need me. I just wanted to be important in someone's life. You can be important in ways that don't hurt people, said Dr. Clark, taking advantage of her moment of hesitation to position himself. Better. Helena, you have medical care knowledge that could legitimately help many children. It was then that a small, courageous voice cut through the tension. Helena, please, don't give me any more bad medicine. Leo, even frightened and physically debilitated, found the strength to speak directly to his tormentor. I promise I'll like you without the medicine. You don't have to make my legs bad for me to like you. Leo's innocent words hit Helena with more force than any argument from the adults. The vial trembled in her hands as she processed what a 5-year-old child had understood better than she did. Love cannot be forced through suffering. The siren stopped just outside the estate, and Edward heard voices and footsteps approaching. Helena heard them too and panicked, raising the vial towards Leo again. But at that crucial moment, a small, determined figure emerged, running from the nearby bushes. Anna had returned to the property, likely brought by the police as a witness, and saw the desperate situation unfolding in the garden. Without hesitation, the 10-year-old girl ran directly to Helena, hugging her legs tightly and shouting, "Stop! Hurting Leo, he's just a baby!" Anna's unexpected intervention completely destabilized Helena. She looked down at the brave child who had risked herself to protect Leo, and something fundamental broke inside her. "I'm not a monster," she whispered more to herself than to anyone present. "No, you're not," Edward agreed, seizing the moment to approach slowly. "You're someone who is suffering and who has made terrible decisions. But you can still choose to do the right thing now." Police officers and paramedics appeared in the garden but kept their distance, sensing the delicacy of the situation. Edward saw that they were prepared to intervene if necessary, but hoped the resolution could occur without additional violence. Helena looked around, at Leo crying in his chair, at Anna clinging to her legs, at Edward extending his pleading hand, at the professionals waiting to help. The reality of her actions and their consequences finally hit her with full force. "I destroyed everything," she murmured, the vial slipping from her trembling hands and falling onto the lawn, its lethal contents spilling harmlessly onto the earth. "I hurt an innocent child because I was afraid of being alone." Edward picked up the empty vial, while Dr. Clark immediately went to Leo for an urgent medical evaluation. The paramedics approached Helena, who collapsed to her knees in the garden, finally confronting the magnitude of her actions. "Will Leo be okay?" Helena asked through tears, looking at Dr. Clark with an expression of genuine remorse that Edward hadn't seen before. "He will recover," the pediatrician replied with professional firmness, "but he will need intensive medical treatment to reverse the damage caused by prolonged intoxication. It will be a long process, but children are resilient." As Helena was escorted by the police, she stopped beside Leo's chair. "I'm sorry," she whispered, gently touching the boy's hand. "I'm sorry for hurting you. You deserve to be happy and healthy." Leo, with the natural compassion of small children, briefly squeezed her hand before she was led away. Edward felt his heart break as he witnessed his son's innocent forgiveness toward the person who had caused him so much suffering. 6 weeks had passed since that traumatic afternoon in the garden, and Edward watched from his study window a scene that filled his heart with gratitude and hope. Leo was standing on the lawn, supported by small, specially adapted crutches, taking cautious but determined steps towards Anna, who encouraged him with radiant smiles. The detoxification process had been challenging, with Leo spending 5 days in the hospital under intensive medical care to eliminate the toxins from his system. Dr. Clark and a team of specialists worked tirelessly to reverse the damage caused by months of systematic poisoning. There were moments of fear when Leo developed high fevers and tremors, but his youth and natural resilience prevailed. Legitimate physical therapy began as soon as Leo was discharged from the hospital. Unlike Helena's manipulative sessions, these exercises were conducted by licensed professionals who celebrated the boy's every small progress. His muscles, weakened by prolonged exposure to the veterinary relaxants, responded slowly but consistently to the proper treatment. Edward had made the most important decision of his life: to completely reorganize his professional priorities. He sold 2 of his smaller companies and delegated the management of the others to trusted managers, freeing himself to be present during every physical therapy session, every medical appointment, every important moment of Leo's recovery. "Daddy, look, I walked to the big tree," Leo shouted, his voice full of pride as he reached the century-old oak that had always been his favorite play spot in the garden. Edward ran out to hug his son, tears of joy streaming down his face. Anna had become a constant presence on the estate. Edward had not only rehired Carmen, but also provided a comfortable house on the property for mother and daughter. Anna received the best quality private education, a small way to acknowledge the extraordinary courage she had shown in saving Leo from a potentially fatal fate. "Anna is my best friend," Leo declared, hugging the girl who had risked herself to protect him. "She's the bravest person I know." Edward fully agreed. Anna's maturity and bravery had taught him valuable lessons about truly listening to the people around us, especially those whose voices are often ignored. He would never again assume that children make up stories when they try to warn adults about dangerous situations. Helena had been convicted of several crimes, including child abuse, attempted murder, and fraud. During the trial, it was revealed that she was part of a larger network that targeted wealthy men through the manipulation of their children. 3 other similar cases were uncovered, resulting in the arrest of several accomplices. Edward testified in court, not with anger, but with the determination to ensure that other families wouldn't go through the same trauma. Surprisingly, Helena had sent a letter to Leo during her sentencing, asking for forgiveness and explaining that she was receiving psychological treatment in prison. The letter was touching in its sincerity, acknowledging the harm she had caused and expressing hope that Leo would grow up strong and happy. Edward decided to keep the letter for when Leo was older and could decide if he wanted to read it. "Daddy," Leo said one sunny afternoon, "do you think Helena was very sad inside? Is that why she did bad things?" The question demonstrated impressive emotional wisdom for a 5-year-old child. "Yes, Leo," Edward replied. "Some people do terrible things when they're very hurt inside. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it reminds us to always be kind to the people around us." Anna, who had become an unofficial older sister to Leo, added, "And always talk to trusted adults when something feels wrong, even if other people say it's not. Important." Edward smiled, watching the two discuss life lessons with a depth many adults couldn't reach. The trauma they had faced, paradoxically, had strengthened their family bonds and taught them all about the importance of honest communication and genuine trust. In that moment, watching Leo take increasingly confident steps through the garden that had almost become the scene of a tragedy, Edward understood that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important warnings. Anna's courage had saved not only Leo, but also exposed a scheme that could have victimized many other families. The estate, once a scene of manipulation and fear, now echoed with genuine laughter and the comforting sound of a child reclaiming his childhood. Edward had learned that true protection doesn't come from wealth or status, but from the ability to listen to those who truly care about us, build relationships based on mutual trust, and never allow work to become more important than the people we love. As the sun set over the gardens, where it had all begun with a little girl's courageous whisper, Edward felt a deep peace, knowing his family was finally safe, united, and built upon foundations of true love and genuine protection.